The air on the 42nd floor of Vance Global Holdings didn't feel like normal oxygen. It felt like a pressurized mixture of expensive cologne, dry-cleaned wool, and raw anxiety. Arthur Pendleton adjusted the collar of his faded, slightly frayed button-down shirt. It was a shirt that had seen better days roughly 5 years ago, before his wife passed away and left him to navigate the world as a solo parent to their now 6-year-old daughter, Lily. In his left hand, Arthur clutched a battered leather briefcase held together by sheer willpower and duct tape. In his right hand, he held Lily's small, warm, slightly sticky fingers. "Daddy," Lily whispered, her large brown eyes darting around the polished marble floors and floor-to-ceiling glass walls that looked out over the sprawling city skyline. "Is this where the superheroes live?" Arthur smiled down at her, a genuine, soft expression that completely erased the tired lines etched into his face. "Not quite, sweetie. This is where people make very big decisions. But remember our rule, okay? Quiet as a mouse." "Quiet as a mouse," Lily confirmed, mimicking a zipped lips motion. Arthur breathed a sigh of relief. He hadn't planned on bringing his daughter to the final pitch meeting for the most critical contract of his independent consulting career. But life has a way of throwing a wrench into the best-laid plans. Lily's school had called 2 hours ago with a sudden plumbing emergency that forced an immediate closure. With no family in the city and his regular babysitter stuck in a college lecture, Arthur had no choice. He had to bring her. He walked up to the reception desk, where a woman with perfectly sculpted hair and a tailored blazer looked at them as if they had just wandered in from a completely different dimension. "Arthur Pendleton for the 2 p.m. presentation with Mr. Vance," Arthur said, keeping his voice polite and professional. The receptionist looked at Arthur's scuffed shoes, then down at Lily, who was wearing a bright pink backpack with a cartoon unicorn on it. The receptionist's eyebrows shot upward. "Mr. Vance is already in the boardroom with the executive committee. I'll let his assistant know you've arrived, but, sir, children aren't permitted on the executive floor." "I understand and I deeply apologize," Arthur said smoothly. "It was an emergency situation. She will sit quietly in the back of the room. She won't be a distraction, I assure you." Before the receptionist could argue, a sleek glass door clicked open, and Julian Vance's executive assistant, a sharp-looking man named Marcus, stepped out. "Arthur, Julian is ready for you. They're running ahead of schedule." "Let's go." Arthur didn't hesitate. He couldn't afford to. This contract, a complete overhaul of Vance Global's supply chain logistics, was worth enough to secure Lily's education and give them the stability they hadn't known for years. He gripped his briefcase, squeezed Lily's hand, and walked down the long, intimidating hallway toward the main boardroom. The boardroom. The boardroom was an imposing cavern of dark walnut wood, plush leather chairs, and high-tech display screens. Seated around the massive table were 12 of the company's top executives, all dressed in sharp, dark suits that practically screamed old money and corporate ruthlessness. At the head of the table sat Julian Vance. At 38, Julian was a corporate prodigy. He had inherited a massive empire and expanded it with a terrifying cold efficiency. He was known in the business world as the Glacier, not just because of his piercing blue eyes and immaculate styling, but because he was entirely devoid of warmth. To Julian, human beings were resources to be optimized or discarded. There was no room for error, no room for sentimentality, and absolutely no room for weakness. As Arthur entered, the low hum of conversation died instantly. 12 pairs of eyes locked onto him. Then 12 pairs of eyes dropped down to Lily. Julian Vance's eyes narrowed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Arthur," Julian said, his voice smooth, low, and incredibly dangerous. "Explain." Arthur took a breath, standing tall. "Good afternoon, Mr. Vance, ladies and gentlemen. This is my daughter, Lily. Due to an unexpected school closure this afternoon, I had to bring her with me. She will sit quietly in the corner. I assure you it will not affect the quality or the focus of my presentation." A few of the executives shifted uncomfortably. Marcus, the assistant, looked like he wanted to melt into the floorboards. Julian didn't blink. He leaned back in his leather chair, lacing his fingers together. "Arthur, this is a pitch for a multi-million-dollar structural overhaul of our global logistics. It is not a daycare. The fact that you think it is acceptable to bring a child into a high-stakes executive boardroom demonstrates a severe lack of professionalism and judgment. Mr. Vance, It was an unavoidable emergency, Arthur replied, maintaining his composure, though his heart was starting to hammer against his ribs. My work speaks for itself. The data I've prepared will save your firm over 20% in operational costs annually. If we could just look at the numbers— No, Julian interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a razor blade. I don't look at numbers presented by people who cannot even manage their own domestic affairs. If you cannot secure basic childcare for a career-defining meeting, how can I trust you to manage a global logistics network? Daddy? Lily whispered, sensing the tension. She gripped Arthur's trousers, looking frightened by the coldness radiating from the man at the end of the table. Julian's gaze snapped to the little girl, then back to Arthur. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated disdain. Get her out of here. In fact, get yourself out of here. Your pitch is canceled. Vance Global does not do business with amateurs who treat the boardroom like a playground. Arthur felt a flush of heat rise up his neck. He could tolerate a lot of things. He had tolerated the grueling hours, the disrespect from lesser clients, and the exhaustion of being a single father. But the sheer public humiliation in front of a dozen executives, coupled with the way Julian looked at his innocent daughter, ignited something quiet and fierce inside him. Mr. Vance, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, entirely devoid of the eager-to-please tone he had walked in with. I understand your time is valuable, but dismissing a data-driven solution that your own operations team begged me to formulate simply because of a family emergency is short-sighted. Julian stood up. He was a tall man, and his presence was intentionally intimidating. He slammed his palms onto the dark wood table. Are you lecturing me in my own boardroom? Julian sneered. Security is already on their way up. I suggest you take your brat and your pathetic little briefcase and leave before you are forcibly escorted from the building. You are done in this town, Pendleton. I will personally ensure that no firm under the Vance umbrella or any of our affiliates ever takes a meeting with you again. Now get out. The boardroom was dead silent. None of the executives dared to look Arthur in the eye. They looked at their tablets, their legal pads, or out the window. Arthur looked at Julian. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked incredibly calm. It was the calmness of a man who had just seen a monster for exactly what it was. Come along, Lily, Arthur said softly. He picked up his briefcase, took his daughter's hand, and turned his back on the richest man in the city. As they walked out, Lily looked back over her shoulder at Julian. You're a mean man, she said, her young voice echoing clearly through the silent boardroom. Julian merely smirked, adjusting his cuffs as the glass doors slid shut behind them. The long night. The ride down the elevator was silent. Arthur held Lily's hand tightly, his mind racing. Julian Vance wasn't joking when he said he would blacklist him. In the corporate ecosystem of this city, a decree from Vance Global was essentially a professional death sentence for an independent consultant. When they reached the lobby, Arthur led Lily to a small cafe across the street. He bought her a chocolate chip cookie and a glass of milk, sitting across from her as she happily munched away, already forgetting the tension of the boardroom. Arthur, however, could not forget. He opened his laptop, staring at the complex algorithms and logistical mapping he had spent the last 3 months perfecting. It was a masterpiece of efficiency. It was a shame that Julian Vance's ego was too large to see it. Suddenly, Arthur's phone buzzed. It was an unknown international number. He answered it. Arthur Pendleton speaking. Mr. Pendleton, a deep, authoritative voice with a distinct British accent spoke on the other end. My name is Harrison Sterling. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Sterling Garrick International. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. Sterling Garrick International was the primary global competitor to Vance Global. In fact, they were a much larger, more massive conglomerate, based out of London but aggressively expanding their North American footprint. Mr. Sterling, Arthur said, forcing his voice to remain steady. How can I help you? We have a mutual acquaintance, Sterling said, a hint of amusement in his voice. A former logistics director at Vance Global who recently joined our firm. He spoke very highly of a proprietary supply chain optimization model you were developing. He mentioned you were pitching it to Julian Vance today. Arthur let out a dry, humorless laugh. The pitch didn't exactly go as planned, Mr. Sterling. Yes, so I've already heard, Sterling replied. Word travels fast when Julian Vance throws a tantrum. My source tells me Vance threw you out because you brought your daughter to the meeting due to a childcare emergency. Arthur braced himself, expecting the same corporate lecture. That is correct. It was an unavoidable circumstance. To Arthur's absolute shock, Sterling let out a booming laugh. Brilliant. Julian always was an arrogant, short-sighted prick. He thinks a spreadsheet matters more than humanity. Let me ask you a question, Arthur. Is your logistics model as good as my director says it is? It's better, Arthur said flatly, his confidence returning. It reduces cross-border transit friction by 24% and cuts redundant warehouse overhead by $3 million in the first fiscal year alone. There was a brief pause on the line. Then Sterling spoke, his voice completely serious now. We've been trying to break Vance's stranglehold on the tri-state shipping corridor for 3 years. If your model can do what you claim, it is exactly the weapon we need to completely sideline them. I can prove the numbers right now, Arthur said, opening his presentation files. Don't bother sending them over email, Sterling said. I happen to be in the city for the next 24 hours, staying at the Four Seasons penthouse. Can you meet me there tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? And Arthur, yes. Bring your daughter if you need to. My wife and I raised 4 children while building this company. I respect a man who handles his business and his family. See you tomorrow. The line went dead. Arthur stared at his phone, a slow, calculated smile spreading across his face. He looked across the table at Lily, who had chocolate crumbs all over her face. Hey, kiddo, Arthur said, wiping her chin with a napkin. How would you like to help Daddy do something really big tomorrow? Lily grinned. Are we going to beat the mean man? Arthur chuckled, a spark of pure determination igniting in his eyes. Yes, Lily, we are going to do exactly that. The next morning, at 7:45 a.m. the following morning, the atmosphere in the executive suite of Vance Global was frantic. Julian Vance stepped out of his private elevator, holding a steaming cup of black coffee. He expected his morning to start with the usual obsequious greetings from his staff. Instead, he found his vice president of operations, Richard, and his assistant Marcus standing by the glass walls, pale-faced and staring at their tablets. Why does everyone look like they're attending a funeral? Julian demanded, walking past them into his office. Richard followed him, his hands visibly shaking. Julian, you need to see the morning financial wires and the shipping indexes. Julian sat down at his massive desk, frowning. What is it, Richard? Speak clearly. Sterling Garrick International just announced a massive exclusive partnership, Richard said, his voice cracking slightly. They just bought out the exclusive rights to a new logistics and distribution framework. They've already locked in the 3 largest independent shipping fleets in the tri-state area. Julian shrugged, taking a sip of his coffee. Sterling Garrick is always buying up smaller logistics firms. It's a drop in the bucket. We still control the primary ports. Not anymore, Marcus chimed in, his voice terrified. The framework they acquired completely bypasses our port agreements by utilizing a newly optimized inland rail-to-truck algorithm. It cuts their transit costs by nearly 25%. Julian, they are undercutting our freight prices by an amount we cannot match without operating at a severe loss. Julian's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. His blue eyes turned to ice. Who developed the algorithm? Richard swallowed hard, looking down at his tablet. The press release was issued 10 minutes ago. Sterling Garrick signed an exclusive $3 million retainment and licensing contract. The developer is Arthur Pendleton. Julian stood up so fast his heavy leather chair slammed into the glass wall behind him. What did you say? It's Pendleton, Richard stammered. The man you threw out of the boardroom yesterday. Sterling Garrick's CEO, Harrison Sterling, flew him out to their corporate jet this morning to finalize the signing. And Julian, there's more. Before Richard could finish, the glass doors to the executive lobby slid open. Arthur Pendleton walked in. He wasn't wearing his faded shirt or his scuffed shoes today. He wore a flawless, bespoke charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was neatly styled and his posture radiated an immense, unshakable power. In his hand, he carried a brand new, high-end Italian leather briefcase, and right beside him, holding his hand, was Lily. She was wearing a pretty new dress and her unicorn backpack, looking up at the high ceilings with a wide smile. The entire reception staff and the passing executives stopped dead in their tracks. The man they had seen humiliated and thrown out by security less than 24 hours ago had just walked back into the castle. and he looked like he owned the place. Julian Vance stormed out of his office, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He marched right up to Arthur, stopping just 2 feet away. "Pendleton," Julian hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "What the hell is the meaning of this? You went to Sterling Garrick? That data was prepared for Vance Global." Arthur looked down at Julian with a calm, patronizing smile. He didn't flinch. He didn't back down. "Actually, Julian, the data was prepared by me," Arthur said, his voice echoing clearly across the open plan executive floor so that every single employee could hear it. "You refused to look at it. You told me I was an amateur. You told me I was done in this town." Arthur lifted his brand new briefcase, opening it smoothly. He pulled out a certified copy of a contract, stamped with the golden seal of Sterling Garrick International. "This is a $3 million, fully executed contract for the exclusive rights to my logistics framework," Arthur said, holding it up so Julian could see the signatures. Harrison Sterling was more than happy to sign it at 8 a.m. this morning. And as a matter of fact, part of our new agreement involves a complete restructuring of Sterling Garrick's local distribution centers. Julian's eyes traveled over the contract, his face draining of color as the reality of the situation set in. With this framework, Sterling Garrick would effectively bleed Vance Global's shipping division dry within 6 months. "Arthur, wait," Julian said, his voice suddenly losing its sharp edge, replaced by a desperate corporate calculation. "We can talk about this. I can top their offer. I'll give you $4 million, $5 million. We can void their exclusivity on a technicality." "I'm afraid money can't buy back what you lack, Julian," Arthur interrupted smoothly. "You see, Harrison Sterling didn't just look at my numbers. When my daughter's school closed, he didn't see a liability. He saw a dedicated father who gets the job done no matter what. He actually had a plush toy waiting for Lily in the conference room." Lily stepped forward, looking up at Julian with a bright, triumphant grin. "And he gave me a giant cookie." Arthur smiled down at his daughter, then looked back up at Julian, his eyes turning hard as flint. "I didn't come here to negotiate with you, Julian," Arthur said, his voice carrying the finality of a judge passing sentence. "I came here to personally deliver our official notice of intent. Sterling Garrick has just acquired the lease on the downtown rail terminal. Your main shipping line is officially blocked as of midnight tonight. If you want to move your cargo, you'll have to go through us." Julian stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, completely, utterly defeated in front of his entire executive team. The man who had deemed Arthur unprofessional had just been completely outmaneuvered, outclassed, and bankrupt of options by the very single dad he had humiliated. Arthur closed his briefcase with a satisfying click. He looked down at Lily. "Ready to go get some celebratory ice cream, sweetie?" "Yes, Daddy," Lily cheered, jumping up and down. Arthur turned around, walking toward the express elevator. He didn't look back. As the elevator doors began to close, Arthur looked out at the stunned, silent floor of Vance Global Holdings, holding his daughter close. The single dad had taken their best shot, stood his ground, and walked away with the crown.